You good to go? Okay, so what we're going to start with now, you guys kind of seen this on the movie, and I can see my floor is kind of out of whack down there. You can see that up in the air. So you have your, doesn't matter what this is, say it's an outside pour, a driveway. So what kind of stone are we going to use in this? Limestone, yes, for strength, right? Okay. So you're going to pour this in concrete. Concrete truck driver, you order your amount. Of course, we figure this by doing what? We measure it up, right? So what's the formula? Thickness divided by 27. Everybody's got that, so that's good. So you figure the amount of concrete you need. We got it ordered. Here they come. They show up on the job. So they're going to start dumping the concrete in there. You have to actually, like that guy did, you have to get out in it. If you wore just boots like this, you're going to get concrete on your boots. It doesn't come off very good. Not only that, it's going to soak through that and your pants. And it's going to give you something called a concrete burn. Some of you may get this in here a little bit when you do your project, if you leave that stuff on your bare hands very long. What it does, especially if you already got a cut, but it gets in there and it burns and it stings, but it doesn't stop. Like you wash your hands, but if you waited too long and you have them concrete burns, it just keeps eating further up in you. It's like you can't get it out of there, and it'll do that for a week or so, and you'll have big blister looking scabby things. And so you got to keep your hands clean. So the concrete truck driver gets there. You're going to get it on you some, but as long as you don't leave it and not get it off, then you're okay. So he starts dumping the mud around. Of course, he cannot put it everywhere it needs to go. So I have my rubber boots on, say. These are kind of nice, this type. Usually buy them big enough they can slip right over your shoes or boots, whatever you're wearing. The nice thing about that is, concrete, like he said, it doesn't wait on you. It dries different every time you pour. So if it's drying fast and you got to take the time to take boots off, put other boots on, that may be the time difference where you have to really work hard compared to you could have had it easy. So these are kind of nice. You just kind of kick them off, and then you can go on to the next portion after the concrete's down. But they cannot put the mud exactly where it needs to go. They get it out there fairly good most of the time for you. But you got to use a tool. This is called a come along, and did they show this on there? A come along? Okay, so this is designed, this is a really nice one. It's aluminum, it's real light. Some are steel and they're really heavy. Makes that work so much more. But you drag it around with this, pushing it up where you need to, pulling it back. Normally, you'll have a few guys out there, at least two. One guy running a come along, the other guy using a board to kind of smooth it off. Does anybody remember what that board's called? And usually it's just a 2x4. Some people have real nice aluminum ones that they use, but you can use a 2x4. Most people that don't do it very much use a 2x4. It has to be straight. I mean, if this had a big crown to it and you were trying to smooth your concrete out, what's your concrete going to do? It's going to be crowned also, yes, and you don't want that. So it's got to be fairly straight. You have your forms all set. Of course, this would have stakes in it, correct, holding it in place to height and from moving. So you're going to start screeting it off. Now, this is about as long as screed board as you would want to use. This is about 8 foot. Anything bigger than that, and I'll go over that after I go over this, how you go about that using a smaller screed board. But it's nice, like sidewalks are really simple because you can get your board from your screed board from form to form. So basically they poured this in there. You got a guy behind you with a come along scraping it back for you, pushing it up where you need it. And you move along here and you're doing this right here. Back and forth, back and forth. Okay, and if you can see a hole, like if you get to a point where it's leaving a hole, you have to stop, push some more up in there. And this is called screeting it off. This does a couple different things. Anybody know what this does by the movie?
Flattens it, fills out holes, and doesn't it bring like the cream up or something?
Yes, perfect. It brings the cream up, it flattens it to a flat surface, brings the cream up, and it also pushes the stone down. Everything's about getting the stones below that surface, okay? You guys will see it when you do your project, how this works. You're trying to bring cream up, stone down, and smooth it out. So that's what that does, okay? So, got it screeded off. But say this, imagine this being a bigger area. Like say this room, you're pouring this floor. You're not gonna have a board as wide as this floor, screeding it off. There ain't no way possible, okay? It would be crooked on top of, you could never pull that much concrete. That right there is probably the hardest part about pouring concrete, running that screed board. It doesn't seem like it when you're the one up running the come-along, but it is. If the person with a come-along's letting it build way up on your board, it's really tough to pull. You won't really see that with smallest projects you guys have, but it is. So say you were pouring something, imagine this as being 8 foot long, which it's not, but you were doing a bigger area that the board didn't reach form to form. What has to happen, and the way most people do it, of course there's laser levels out there now, and that helps you some. Some people don't use stakes anymore, most people do. So what you would have to do, you would have to determine where you needed to put stakes out here to the height you needed it by the length of the screed board you're using. So you would pound a wood stake in right here, get it to the same height as what the form was or what you wanted. So I got a couple X's marked here where we would have stakes. Normally you use wood stakes, that way you don't have to pull them out. You can just pound them down in and get rid of them, take them below the concrete. So you have that stake set to height. So the concrete truck driver comes in here and he may pour this section and this section too full of concrete. So where you would want to start is at your stake to form, and you would screed this off, okay, get that nice and level, okay. Now you have to get rid of that stake. You've already got this set right across here to the level you want. You would kind of dig the concrete out around your stake so you don't splash yourself in the face, take a sledgehammer, pound it down, fill that little bit of hole with concrete, and then you would stay away from that area. You wouldn't want to step in it. You've already got it where you want it. So then you could come this direction and screed from this pad you just made that's perfectly level, and you'd use that like your form, okay? That's a little harder to work with. You got to have a little more finesse on the board, because otherwise you would dig into that. So you would screed that off, then you could come over here, screed this off to that form, then move on. You would get this area poured, then screed. Does that make sense? It's a little bit harder when it's a bigger pour, okay? So talking about that, so you have it all screeded off. By the movie, what is your next step?
Don't you go around the sides of that?
You do that after, but not right after. So once you have your concrete down, this is what the part I talked about. It's nice to, with these boots, you kick them off, you get them off, because you don't need to walk out in it anymore. You've got it set. Okay, now you're going to work from the edges mainly to start with. You don't need your boots on. Now, what do you think would happen if you left your concrete on these boots? You're going to throw your boots away, pretty much. Same way with your screed board. I mean, if you were going to reuse it, you would want to get that cleaned up right away, okay, after that. Now, you got to think about job sites. A lot of times there's no water there. There's no hose other than what's on the concrete truck. Okay, so your next step after you got it down, before that concrete truck would leave, you'd want to spray your boots off, spray any tools off that you use, clean your sledgehammer off. The bad thing about concrete, once it dries on there, there's no good way of getting it off. Okay, it's going to pretty much be there forever. So you want your come along, you'd want to make sure you sprayed that off on the truck. Then you always want to have a bucket of water, because you may not have no source of water there. Because throughout the day, you're going to have to keep cleaning your tools while you're working on this. So you grab a bucket or two of water from the concrete truck. Another good idea is sometimes you have holes that you'll fill later, so you need a little extra concrete. So normally you'll have them pour you a little puddle of concrete someplace close to the job that you could grab a little bit more concrete if you needed it. So we have this all done. We're ready for our next step. Your next step would be, does anybody remember what this tool is called? It's a bull float. Okay. I brought these in from home. This is a really nice set. It's a lot nicer than what that guy had, and I'll show you the difference. Do you remember him pulling it across there? Of course, these handles just snap on, go to a hole. You just, for the longer project, you just keep putting more handles on. Now this is, if you were doing this whole floor in here, you would want to, once you got concrete, say you started there and you're working your way this way, you would want to stop when you got about out here and bull float all that before you poured any more concrete. Of course, all this floor wouldn't come in one truck. This would probably be 3 trucks, okay? But you'd want to bull float because you wouldn't be able to reach that later on, okay? This, after about the amount of poles I have there, it gets really difficult to run these. This one's really nice because it has a twist action. See how that tips that different directions when I twist my pole? The one he was using was adjustable with a wing nut, so you only had one adjustment you could use. And it's, so sometimes you have them poles and you got them lifted way up in the air, and then you got to drop them way down close to the ground to pull it back. It's kind of a pain in the butt. This one's a lot nicer because you can adjust it as you go. So first thing you want to do, what does this do? What's the purpose of this?
Doesn't it bring the cream up more?
Again, cream up, stone down. That's what you're shooting for. Because if you had a stone right close to the surface, what do you think that concrete around that's going to do? That cement. It's going to flake off, and then that stone's going to be exposed, and it's going to look like garbage. Okay. So you have this. So you run this out there. So when I'm running this out there, I want it so it's tipped like this. I'm running on the back side of the float. I run it across the whole direction. Then once I get to the other side on that form, I let it drop down. Now I want it to go this direction. Okay, see how much easier it is? I didn't even have to move my handle height-wise, where the type he had, you got to be lifting your handle up and down to do that. This one's really nice because it does tip, so it makes it so you don't have to tip your handle, pretty much stays in one spot. Okay, so that's how that works. You run it across and back. Okay, it is bringing the cream up, stone down. That is the purpose. So that's your bull float. Now, after that's done, what would be your next step, do you think? If you wanted a nice finished edge, yes, your next step would be an edger. I have a couple different ones here in the school. I have bought some for you guys to use. A couple different types of edgers here. This is big. It's a little bit easier to stay flat on your concrete. Of course, on the project you guys are working on, this would be way overkill. You've seen that they had one on a pole. That's nice too. So you're down here and you got to edge along this, and I'll show you this because I'm going to do one of the projects you guys are doing, but that probably will not happen today, but I just want to kind of explain these. You run this edger along here, okay? Get that edged. What that's doing, because once you remove this form, it's a lot neater edge there than if this was a driveway. Now, if this was a garage floor, you don't edge a garage floor up against the wall. Now, where the door openings are, you would want to edge it in them locations. So this makes a nice rounded over clean edge is what it does. Now, the first time you do this, it's kind of difficult. You got all them stones right there in your way, and sometimes it digs up a little bit, and you got to put a little bit more in. That's what I talked about, having some extra. So you get that all cleaned up, and you have to do this about 3 times to get them nice throughout your finishing process. So you have it edged. What do you think is your next step?
Do you start putting lines like in the middle?
Okay, you would want to cut your joints in. They have some joiners that go on, where did I do with my bull float? Right here. That clamp on that so you could actually use your bull float to do it. Also, you could do it once you got out on the concrete with a joiner here. This one's got a pretty deep groove. This one has a less groove, okay? Normally, what most people do today, if you're gonna cut joints in something, most people cut them in later with a saw. And the reason being, it's so much easier. It's easier to keep them neater. So normally, like for sidewalks, they would be pretty easy to use one of them and get it nice. But like for garage floors, if it's real big, or a pole barn floor, they usually cut them in later. And one thing I will tell you, they showed you cutting them corners there because that's where it wants to crack. The whole purpose of cutting those joints in is to not eliminate, but slow down or limit the cracking of concrete. Concrete, they say, is almost guaranteed to crack. Pole barns are really bad because where your poles are, they always want to get cracks coming off them poles. So what normally is done is at every pole, you want a cut line going across that. So what happens if it starts cracking at the pole, and say you have your line cut on this pole, on this side of the pole, but your other side of the pole's here, that'll start cracking, but that crack will go right to that, where you got that line cut, and then that crack will stay right in that line. And then it don't spider web the whole floor up. That's the purpose of them, to let that crack have some place to go where it doesn't crack everything else up and remove your finish. So yes, you could be cutting your lines in. Your next step after that is done, and it's usually done just from the outside edges first, because you're kind of waiting for that concrete to get ready, and it's not quite ready for you to get out on yet. So you go around with this. Does anybody know what this is called?
A flat surface.
This is a hand derby, or a, trying to think of the word, not a trowel, hand derby or a mag, a hand mag. It's kind of like your bull float. It's thicker. See how this is real thin? This is a finish trowel. It's kind of thick, but what do you think this does?
Brings the cream up.
Brings the cream up, pushes the stone down, and flattens the surface. Everything's kind of doing the same thing, but it has to be done in a certain order. So normally you get here on your edges, and you're going to go along your concrete and this kind of go like this and smooth that out. So you're getting rid of lines. I will tell you, a bull float will leave lines on the edges, so you have to get rid of them. So you go all around your outside edges with this here, okay, and you're just kind of checking to see how hard your concrete is. Once it gets to a hardness where you can get out on it, and I don't mean get out on it with your feet, okay. Now they used another thing called a Fresno, and they did a lot of work with a Fresno. A lot of people don't use a Fresno. Like for outside pours, it works really good that you're going to broom finish because you don't have to get as picky with them. But normally everybody gets out on top of the concrete and hits it by hand a few times. Couple choices. I couldn't dig it out this morning, but we do have a power trowel back there. For something big like a big pole barn, you'd want to have a power trowel, and it looks like a fan, and we'll try to get that out so everybody can see it. But it runs on the ground and just spins around doing the same thing this is doing. You just walk kind of behind it, and you're covering where you've walked on the concrete like this, and it smooths it out to a nice finish. So you go around with your mag on the outside edges. Your next step is it's getting hard enough that you can get out on it. So you have what's called knee boards. These are fiberglass ones. These are really nice and really expensive. These are designed for you to get right on the concrete, and you don't move them around by hand. Your feet go here, your knee, of course, goes on this pad, and you have both in your hand. Why did he have both in his hand?
So you could like
lean on one, you can get a farther stretch. When you're on your boards, it helps push you around. Now these fiberglass, they do make these out of aluminum also. The first time over, you're not really using this to put a finish on it. You're just using the mag to smooth it out and bring the cream up and all that. So you're here, you're going like this, but you can lean way out with this and get a big area, okay? And you're always working backwards. So if I started here, I'm gonna work my way back this way. So then once you got that area out in front of you ready, then you use this, and it's a little harder on this because it's not wet, but you slide just like that. Then you do that area. Now these have made a little bit of marks because it's still wet, but you can fix them as you go with the knee boards, okay? That's one way. Another way is just making you up a wood set. I've had these for years. They work great. Little harder to work with than these. It takes a little bit more time, but you throw these down out there, same process. Knee goes on one, feet on the other one. You're doing the same thing. The only thing is you can't slide these around. So you get that area, then you get up on this one, you pick this one up, you move it backwards, and then you get where that one was. The same process, it's just a little slower and a lot cheaper. Doesn't really matter. All right, so you've went over it with the mag. Now it's getting harder, it's drying, which is called the curing process. Now you go over it with this, and usually 2 or 3 times with this. Okay, this is a finish trowel, and this kind of does the same thing, but it's really putting a super smooth surface on it. Okay, so now you're using this to hold and lean out on, and you're using this to put your finish on. Okay, anybody have any questions with that? Yes.
My favorite part, I think, is next. Is it when you take the broom?
Okay, if it was a broom finish, yes. He was saying horsehair broom. This is a concrete broom. I don't know if it's horsehair or not. Same thing. You got off it. You did a coat. Now you got to wait a little bit for it to get a little bit harder before you can do your next coat. That's why you got the pail of water. You're washing this stuff up. You're washing your knee boards up, getting ready. Then you got to wait a little while normally. Okay. So next, say it was broom finish. Yes. You got concrete broom. This has where I can thread this on there using the same poles. So if you had a long stretch, you know, you had to get out there 20 foot and then rake it across. Usually when it's something really big like that, you got to keep cleaning that broom off every time you pass. Otherwise, you pick up little bits of concrete, and then the next time you drag it, it leaves a nasty looking mark across there. Okay, so that is that. Okay. You can go ahead and stop